I am a poor wayfaring stranger, while traveling through this world of woe. Yet there's no sickness, toil, or danger in that bright world to which I go. I know dark clouds will gather round me. I know my way is rough and steep, but golden fields lie out before me, where God's redeemed shall ever sleep.
Hello and welcome to Tea Time Theology. I'm your host, Taylor Wilkie, and today I have with me Ivy Swinsky.
Hello.
And Drake Douglas.
Hi.
Question mark?
Am I he of who you speak?
It's two. Your name was written 2 pages back in my notebook, so
That's all right.
I was unprepared to say it out loud again. And today we're here to talk about Season 1, Episode 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds.
Episode 3.
3 of Strange New Worlds, Ghosts of Illyria. Just a quick recap for anybody who isn't familiar. This episode is about... this episode opens with... the away team on a planet. There's a storm coming, and they all need to get off. But Pike and Spock get stuck on the planet, and the rest of the away team gets beamed off. But then there's a epidemic,
A mysterious illness
spreading amongst the crew, and it's a fun one, I think.
It is.
So where do we want to start with this one? My first thought was, when I was watching this, like I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and the first mistake they made was they split the party.
Right.
They sent Pike and Spock off to do their own thing, and then everyone else went to the rally point. I think this episode would have ended if they had just why don't we just call Spock on the... Oh no, they couldn't. That's why.
They couldn't because there was interference
from the
ion storm.
From the MacGuffin storm.
Also, why is Spock not on a leash at this point? I feel like he is always off, accidentally almost getting himself killed.
He can't help himself. He's very curious.
Yeah.
It's true.
It's very curious. But he does tend to always find the thing that they need in that exact moment. So there might be an instructive reality, right?
His insight is very low, but his perception is very high.
Yes.
Yes.
It's the hearing,
Yes.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we like I said, we open and they're looking for what happened to the Illyrian colonists that were living on this planet. This isn't Illyria. This is a colony of them. For those who don't know, Illyrians are generally a pariah in the to Starfleet because they're genetically modified persons, and that's a big time no-no in Starfleet.
Why is that, Taylor? Can you give us some insight?
I'm so glad you asked, Drake.
Just in case we don't exist in this universe the same way you do.
The reason why genetically modified persons are no-no in Starfleet is because in the far-off year of 1999, there were genetically modified persons on Earth, and they started a major conflict that ended up in a World War III scenario. And from that moment forward, the people of Earth put a ban on genetically modified persons, and genetically modified in a way that they were smarter, faster, stronger, all around, just enhanced humans, and that level of power, if you give that to a certain amount of individuals, will create, or according to the show, creates opportunity for them to just take control and become just essentially tyrants.
So you are saying that infinite power does corrupt infinitely.
Yes. And the way that they come to be is the Noonien Sung family. Noonien Sung is was the last name of Khan Noonien Sung, who was the leader of the genetically modified people of Earth in the 90s. They were eventually deposed, all put on a ship called the Botany Bay, which is a reference to Australia being a prison colony for Britain. And they were shot off into. They were somehow put into stasis and shot off into space, where eventually Kirk and Spock find them on the Enterprise, and then
we get a whole movie about it.
Then we get a whole episode plus another 90-minute movie,
right.
And some say that movie saved the franchise.
It's a pretty good movie.
It's a great movie.
Do you recommend?
It's a bold thing to say about any content when there's like 7 series about it.
Yeah.
This one movie.
But what's fun about the Noonien Sung line? So we have La'an Noonien Sung in this show. She is a descendant directly of Khan Noonien Sung. They took the name Noonien Sung because that was the scientist who developed in Star Trek the technology to genetically modify folks. They were bred to be genetically modified from embryos all the way up to being people.
So it's not like a super soldier moment
No,
where they
it's not
get
like
an injection.
No.
They're born this way.
Very intentional.
Yeah. But the fun fact about that is that that scientist, Noonien Sung, eventually his ancestor, Sung, not Noonien Sung, just Sung, creates Data for the next generation. In an effort to continue the idea of the family of creating a perfect life form.
Right. And Data's entire journey is worth a follow.
Oh
right?
my God, he's perfectly
wrestling with like needing to be human or wanting to be human and not. It's like that's a whole other series probably.
Plot twist: he was human the whole time,
right? Because
he's perfectly imperfect, just like every other human.
That's right. Well, that's a wrap for this episode.
But yeah, so that's kind of where we're going with this episode, and it's kind of about La'an.
But is Leon
She is not.
modified?
Mm-mm.
She is not. But Una Chin Riley is.
Oh, spoiler! This is the big point, plot point of this episode.
And this plot point is.
But how is she a descendant of Khan then if she's not personally genetically modified?
I don't know. Maybe they
just didn't do it.
I mean, it's been hundreds of years, so.
Okay. Cool.
For them, so maybe you just got bred out of them.
Okay, cool.
And this episode, to me anyway, is generally about La'an coming to terms with who she is, and also being confronted by a person by a being that she was always accused of being, and subsequently learned to hate growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Which is number 2. Or number 1. Sorry.
Number one.
So Una is, we find out that Una is genetically modified, and this is a huge deal. You cannot be in Starfleet if you are one of these people, and so this has been a big secret. But Una and La'an are tight. Una kind of rears La'an in a lot of ways, and so La'an is faced with this, not insignificant reality that someone who she loves is someone, in fact, that she's been taught to hate.
Someone who literally saved her life.
Right.
Una, we find out in the next episode, or maybe in this episode.
Yeah, we find out like episode 1
that Una was the person who saved La'an from the Gorn.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So all things are not as they seem, it would seem.
Would you say all good things are not as they seem?
I think all things are not as they seem. So yeah, we have a lot of interpersonal stuff in this episode. And Taylor, I like that you talked about this idea of like La'an focusing or needing to kind of grapple with who she really is. And I think a huge theological theme in this episode is what we would call ontology, right? So this is this idea that we have like an essence as created beings, that there's an ontological truth to a lot of things, like what makes a thing, what makes us us, what makes God God, what makes, and we see in a lot of ways a lot of questions and commentary and strife and conflict around people's understanding of like the ontological reality of what they're doing. Like we were just talking about, La'an has to grapple with, Una becomes, at least in her mind's eye, an enemy, but she has to come to remember like Una's real essence, like who she really, really is, and to kind of pick that over the fear or the prejudice that she's been taught to hold.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you say taught, and that's something that I think we overlook a lot in our society. I mean, this is going to be a very society-heavy episode, I think. Mm-hmm. This is more of talking about our current state of being than anything else, and it's hate. Hate is taught. Hate is learned, I think. I don't hate anybody that I meet in passing, but I'm not gonna lie. There are times where I found something out about somebody, and it changes my perception of them. Mm-hmm. It changes who I perceive them as. It changes our relationship to how I want to treat them, or even how I interpret their treatment of me.
I think it's interesting to sort of think about this idea as perception as reality in this episode as well, because I think, and so for me, this was my first time meeting the Illyrians, and this is like a really great episode to meet them, because they're like the sympathetic character of the episode. Right. They're not like these, I have no idea who Khan is, I have no idea what's happening with any of like that stuff that seems to be deep trauma that they're all working through. But in this episode, the Illyrians are really shown as just this like very tragic group. They're trying to de-engineer themselves so that way they can join Starfleet, and that is what ends up killing them. That's what ends up creating this sort of plague. They're the ones that save Spock and Pike. Yes, mm-hmm. Pike. I'm like, who's there? They're the ones that save.
It's so easy to say Kirk.
Yes.
Yeah. No, but like they're the ones that save them, and then also like Una is really the one who saves everyone at the end. And I think, and we're just like totally gonna jump to the end of the episode, but I think her captain's log was what I found most fascinating about the entire, because I think like the show is like, it's a pretty basic show. We find out that our villains are not actually our villains and like all that kind of stuff, which is like, we literally probably could have turned on any TV show at that point and that could have been the thesis we found. Mm-hmm. But I think what was interesting about what she said is she's like, Pike said he's not going to like tell anyone on me because I was like doing this. She's like, but what happens when I'm not perfect? What happens when I don't save the day, or I can't save the day? Not even don't, because I feel like don't like it means that she's made an intention to not, but like there are certain things that are outside of her control. And I think it's interesting to see Una as a mirror to Pike, because in a certain way they're both trying to control how others see them and to control sort of like these uncontrollable things. Right. Pike, he's running from his destiny to like die, and Una is like running from the moment that Starfleet finds out that she's not who they think she is. So I think like both of them are struggling with the same thing, which is I think one of the reasons why they get along so well. Mm-hmm. But also this idea like what does happen when we're not perfect. And I think if we're gonna like switch it around and pretend like Una is our Christ figure here, I think we find out what happens when they're not perfect, and that's when you get the crucifixion. When they stop being who the society wanted.
Right.
I don't know, that might have been too far of a pull.
No, I mean, I think you're exactly right. And I think that this is sort of this is really, we're getting at the crux of like what Christian hope is made out of, right? And that's that perfection was only born in one way, right? And that it is actually an act of our faithfulness to lean into the imperfection of our being, and instead of looking at the imperfection, to look at the opportunity for redemption, right? And you can kind of even see, the scene where Una, she knows she's found out, and she's going to kind of like turn herself in, for lack of a better term, to Pike, and she puts her badge down, and even that, even though there's like Una hasn't done anything wrong, right? I mean, she's not like guilty of anything other than being who she was literally created to be. But even that is this kind of interesting gloss on this concept of like confession and absolution, right? So she sort of is like, okay, well, like this is what it is, and it's that. And I often try to, in our tradition, confession is not very popular, a very popular sacrament for people to partake in, and I understand why. I mean, it's for a long time been very like guilt laden, and
oh my God,
it's all about
worst.
like sit in a room and talk about how terrible you are, and then someone will be like, well, good news, like, I guess you're right, you are terrible, but there's, a workaround, and, what though I think confession actually does, I mean, for us, is that it allows us to sort of surrender to this reality, right? It's not about, I mean, yes, like, if you've actually done a thing you shouldn't have done, or if you've acted in a way, and even that stuff, like, that we have control over, it's good to take responsibility for that, to amend for that, if possible. All that stuff is good. But if we're talking about like ontology, if we're talking about like the essence of what makes us who we are, part of our ontology is like utter dependence on God, right? And we often inhabit this sense of like, and Ivy, this is kind of what you were saying made me think of this. We often inhabit this sense of what is technically speaking a kind of idolatry, where like we decide that we don't need to be dependent on anyone. We can figure it out. We can change the future. We can be who we want to be. I can do this. Except from an Orthodox Christian understanding, that's idolatrous, because that's not how it works. We are utterly dependent on a Creator who loves us and is present with us in multiple ways, and who has taken stock and taken stake in our nature and in our sense of self, of who we are as people and as individual persons. So confession is a way of sort of like surrendering to that reality. It's not necessarily always, I think that the spiritual work of confession is, yes, taking stock for things that should have been different, but also just remembering to surrender to the reality that like redemption is actually the point. It is not perfection. It is not avoidance, it is redemption. That is our superpower, right? As Christians, is that everything can be redeemed, everything can be mended, but we do have to surrender to that option. It doesn't just force its way down our throat.
And I will say, as someone who watched, I don't know if you guys knew that she was Illyrian going into the episode, but like I definitely did not.
Well,
so.
Right. I mean, I did because I watched the episode before, but
a reasonable person would not.
Yeah.
But I think what was also really interesting was watching it, because you watch her burn up, and then she like never talks about it again. So for me, I thought she was like infected this whole time and was like just hiding it better than everyone else. So I also think it's funny where then also the perception of her was different, because I was like, okay, like, is this her really in charge? Is it not? Like, who's sort of leading her brain at this point?
I guess she patient zero, and she's really spreading this around the ship. And she's the problem, and she's not talking about it.
I mean, that might be a little heavier handed than the language I would use, but sure.
Yeah. No, I had a similar thought in watching that as well. Yeah.
So anyway, so in the idea of her being Illyrian and she's been genetically modified in this way to combat illness, like her body just rejects any kind of illness that enters her body, and I think that's really the only genetic modification she has. I don't think she's like stronger or faster.
No, she's strong because she lifted a hammer and threw him over her shoulder. It's amazing.
I think Andorians are just light. I don't know.
No, I think that was meant to be. Yeah, that was meant to be a point because I think Chapel even says like, "How are you doing that?" You know, like what's and that's exactly the point because she's like, well, about that.
And let's talk about Chapel for a second. We've had 3 episodes and we haven't really talked about Chapel.
She's perfect.
She's like a stone cold badass.
Yeah, she's pretty great.
And I really love this is just Trek talk. Really.
Yeah.
Like I love because we had Chapel in the original series. She's another legacy character.
Okay.
And one of the things that they really in the last episode they she was being like a little flirty with Spock. And there's a joke made about Chapel's into you, and Spock's like, what's emotion? But I really like that they're playing that up now because in the original series that there's like a big episode where I think I wrote it down. It's the one where maybe I didn't. I think it was like Time Amok or whatever. It's the one where Spock his Podflower gets all jacked up and he's gonna go back to Vulcan and he's gonna fight Kirk and all that. But she comes to his quarters with food because she likes him and he's like, get away from my woman, I don't care, and blah blah blah. So I just like that little seed that they're planting. And they're expanding on her character where it just makes her she doesn't get a lot to do in the original series, and I really like that she's being portrayed as a very capable officer of Starfleet.
And she is kind of the counselor of the team. There's so many of them are coming to her with very vulnerable, real problems that do that annoying thing where it doesn't fit perfectly into my professional box or my personal box or my whatever, my duty box or my dream box or whatever, and she somehow is able to kind of thread the needle on all of that for these characters and say, listen, if you want to flirt with her, here's how you do that, or but then at the same time she's such an instructive character. I think especially for caregivers, I definitely picked up on this kind of from a pastoral perspective. She's doing all of this and quite obviously ignoring her own stuff. She's that scene at the bar where she's on a date, probably like a hookup or something like that with another Starfleet person, and the second it becomes kind of real or he wants to make it more than just a fling, she quite literally gets up and leaves, right? Because that intimacy thing is so it's a really instructive thing about how it's so often easy for us to say the right things to people about their stuff while we are very squarely ignoring or not dealing with our own, which is why we need to do this sort of in tandem, right? We all need our mirror, no matter what we do, for a profession or with our skills or abilities.
I do like another part of the. I know we're jumping around a lot, but this is just a jump around episode. I do like. We get a great view of Pike and his leadership in this series, and Pike is quickly becoming my favorite captain. I don't know if it's because it's a modern retelling, it's a modern telling of what a Starfleet captain should be, or how a leader should be, or if it's just he's just a generally feel better vibe captain than Picard or even Sisko, I think, and Janeway. I think those are really the 3 pillars of great captains. Kirk was okay, but I really think Picard, Sisko, and Janeway were great captains as leaders. Anyway, where he kind of like looks at her, like she comes out and she tells him, she says like, this is who I am. I lied. I'm not allowed. Essentially, she's like, I completely acknowledge I am not allowed to be in this space with you. And he says, don't worry about it. And she says, well, what about Starfleet? And he like full stops and he looks at her and says, don't worry about Starfleet.
Yeah,
I'll
handle Starfleet.
I'll worry about Starfleet.
Yeah.
You just keep doing you.
Okay, but do you also think that he's kind of living on an edge because he knows he like can't actually really be sanctioned because he knows where his life ends in the 10 years?
Well, that's a great
my God,
a great question. A couple episodes ago or last episode, I can't remember. We talked a little bit about this idea of the reality of death, like
predestination.
and just like, or just living in the sense that we know that death, at least bodily, earthly death is likely for all of us, and this is a really great example of what doing that hard work, kind of faithfully approaching death as a part of life. If you think, it's pretty stark and maybe a little sharp in this example, but that begs this question of like, so then like, what might we be capable of doing, right? If we lived in this way, right? Mm-hmm. If we lived in a way that we knew that, no next day was promised, or, but, and again, there were a lot of cliches about this that floating around, like, live every day as your last, blah, blah, blah. But I think this is a great point. It's like, is he able to do that? Because there's this funny thing that happens about sort of like faithful dying and faithful death and sort of the managing the reality of our mortal existence, is that it actually allows us to better see the eternal reality of our existence, because if it only ever stops at our death, then we're never really seeing the big picture of like kind of what we're capable of as beings, not just humans, but just as human beings. And so I think this is a perfect example, right? It's like, Pike's willing to sort of really go out on a limb here because he's like, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? Like this, I'll die, right? And so like, and that's a very flippant kind of thing to. It's a very flippant kind of thing to say, but it's not the worst thing to think about, right? I mean, and this is, again, part of, there are benefits to Christian living. Like, there are real benefits to this, and one of them is sort of this sort of brazen ability to be like, what's the worst that's going to happen? I'll die, and then if your answer is like, okay, then that's a very different way of living, right? And I think so. Pike, I think, in this exchange, Pike sort of gives us a very intense but short dose of like what that might look like.
And then, because we're just gonna like fully jump to the end of the episode, and then we see this idea of like, what's the worst that can happen? You die with the doctor who's very sweet, but I don't remember his name, and his dog.
Mbenga.
Yeah, and then you see him with his daughter, which I don't really understand. They explained it in the episode, and I still...
Do you want to hear about transporter buffers? Because I can talk about that too.
Do I want to hear about transporter buffers? Okay, in like 60 seconds, what does this actually mean? Because then she showed up in the chair, and I was like, what's happening?
Yeah, so something that came up in Star Trek is what you can do is when you're transporting from one place to another, your data, for the lack of a better term, has to go through this buffer, because it's like there's a principle in physics, that the Heisenberg principle, matter cannot occupy two places simultaneously. So they need to have a buffer to pick you up off of the planet, put you into a buffer state, and then rematerialize you. It's called the Heisenberg compensator. But what some people have figured out, and Mbenga figured out, this is a lot more common than we thought it was initially. You can hold somebody in the buffer indefinitely, and they're just buffering. It's just like
age. They don't like exist I mean, they do, but like they're data, but they don't exist as like a being.
The best example of this is from a TNG episode where they find a crash shuttle on like a Dyson sphere, and there's a buffering program in there, and they unbuffer it, and it's Scotty, but Scotty's been buffering for like 200 years.
It's like being cryogenically frozen, kind of.
Okay,
like,
cool.
But not.
Yeah. So that's why. So the reason why he saves his daughter, Mbenga knows about this trick. He puts his daughter into the buffer so he can take her out for minutes at a time because she has a sickness that will cause her to die in days.
Yeah.
So he's quite literally, like, biting off as few minutes. It's like it's his need to be with her, but know that every minute costs something, right?
Yeah.
And it was just like a heartbreaking thing.
Yeah, and like you said, I'm the chief medical officer on the flagship of Starfleet. There are a million worlds out there, and we're going to visit as many as we can. And one day, I'm going to find a cure for my daughter.
Right.
On one of those worlds.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he gets weird when Hammer comes in.
Yeah.
During the height of the the Demi. Mm-hmm. Hammer comes in. He's like, "Hey, I gotta mess around with your transporter," and he's all like, "No, you can't mess around with
Please don't do that."
And he's all like, "Well, why not?" He's like, "I really can't tell you because I'm trying to do something against the rules." And yeah, it's just, you know. But speaking of that, that was like a really watching that scene, especially with Mbenga not knowing, nobody knew what was going on, and it really, I had to look it up. They shot this scene in 2021. After the height of the pandemic, of our pandemic kind of went down, and it I don't know if you guys remember, but that scene really nails the feeling of the early days of the pandemic. Like, we don't know what's going on, what's happening. I remember earlier in 2020 or late 2019, I heard that, like, for some reason China's just building a whole bunch of hospitals. Like, today we're building hospitals. That's what China's decided to do, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. And, you know, one thing led to another, and, you know, in a global pandemic.
Right.
But it was just eerie to watch that scene. And this is another example of, you know, Star Trek showing us who we are, what happened.
Well, and I think it also shows that it can be like, oh, this large scale, like, oh, these people are dying, or like something's going wrong, or that kind of stuff. But then I think what was really interesting is Una asked him what was so important that you would like be willing to put everyone in jeopardy, and he's like, it's not a what, it's a who. And I think we all can be like, oh, well, I wouldn't have done that, but I think everyone has a who.
Sure.
That is like, this is who I would do this for. And I think what was so great about that scene, that I think leads into the scene that she had earlier with Pike, is that she shows a lot of humanity, being like, oh, we're going to give you like a specialized power cord so that way this doesn't happen again, and all that kind of stuff. And I wonder if that scene would have played differently if her conversation with Pike had played differently. Because I think it's one of those things where, like, when you get shown grace, you react with grace, where, like, she was shown love and grace with Pike, so she was able to then offer that to somebody else.
Well, Mbenga he played a role in this when she first comes out in sick bay. She says, like, why aren't you sick? It's like, you know, I'm Illyrian, blah blah blah. He actually says to.
He's like, I knew.
No, he says he knew because he scanned her, but then he says, I have it written down. He says, but it doesn't matter. No one cares. And he right before when he gets sick, he's like, you got to put me out because I'm about to go nuts too. She says, you know, like, thanks for understanding. And he says, you know, prejudice has kept people from helping each other for centuries with no scientific justification. There's no reason why Una is that pretty much he's saying there's no reason we need to hate Una or dislike her. Una is still who Una is. Just because she was genetically modified doesn't mean anything. Doesn't change her.
Right. Right.
And I think that's another reason why she was being so gracious with the transporter and not just, you know, throwing him in irons and bringing him down to the brig and all that.
Yeah.
It also ties us kind of back again to that theme of sort of confession and absolution. I mean, ideally the goal of absolution is always grace, right? I mean, it is always this reminder. That's what you are being like you can be absolutely sure, right, that grace is what's on offer, and I think that yes, that's a reflexive endeavor, right? When we go and we do this, and then we get that grace, and then we are more willing on the other end to also act that way. You don't have to be a clergy person to exercise grace. Ideally, please, anyone listening, please don't think that's not your job. It's squarely your job at all times and in all places.
There's a great band that I've been like obsessed with lately, and they're called Enter the Haggis, and they have a great song, and it's called Shangri-La, and one of the choruses of the song is in the time it takes you to villainize the other side, I could build a bridge to start anew. Like, it just feels so easy to villainize people who just don't agree with us right now, and it's hard. It's hard, and we need to understand that we're all just people, and we are living through a very hard time in human history. There's a lot of real bad things happening. And I'm not sure, I'm 35. I'm not sure it's because I'm seeing it as hard times because I'm 35. I just haven't lived long enough, or because, the 90s seemed pretty okay. The 2000s seemed pretty okay. And things didn't start getting dicey until Harambe, and then everyone all of a sudden had an opinion on euthanasia. Right. But we need to give each other that grace. We need to give each other that space. We need to listen to each other. Try our best to understand. And I feel like we live in a meme culture where everything needs to be broken down into 3 or 4 words, and I don't think that's a fair assessment or that's a fair way to listen or learn about others.
Right.
There's actually been studies that like the way we read has changed. So like before, like if you were reading an article, you would like start at the bottom and like finish all the way, but because of like all the hyperlinks in Wikipedia pages, like you read to a certain part, then you get to a word and you'll click there and then you'll go down. So we're no longer reading vertically, we read horizontally, but that means we don't actually get to the end of the original article a lot of the time. And I think that's sort of like what we're seeing in this episode is 2 different ways to look at situations and seeing like the humanity within that. And I think we're going to talk about this a little bit in the next episode as well, because that's like kind of the thesis of that one too. But I do think the other thing that's like really wild is that it's light. Like there's something really funny about, because I feel like we always think of light as like, oh, like good and dark, like light is the good thing, and then seeing that like even that can kill you and have catastrophic. And I think with Hammer, and I've yet to decide if I like Hammer. We're like still working on this. I'm only 4 episodes in. Don't be mad. Don't look at me like that. We're gonna see. But I think what is interesting about Hammer is I feel like he thinks he's too smart to be affected by this disease. If like that makes sense. And I think it's like really poetic when he then like is
transports
totally
the core of the planet into the ship.
Yeah, and you're like, what is happening?
And he's like, look how cool this is.
It's like, it's so warm, it's so warm.
I'm like, oh. But no, I think like that's something that's really interesting too, is like I think a lot of times people will be like, oh, I'm like too smart to be affected by this, or like I'm too fill in whatever word you want. And I think like we do get to sort of see that with Hammer, and like he was like, I won't be affected, and then it's like, oh, but babe, like you're actually gonna be the one that accidentally kills all of us.
He's that's, I mean, not to get too Star Trek-y about it, but that's like that's Endorian's whole vibe. Like, we are better than you in every way. We are stronger, faster, better, smarter, everything. Like, that's just like a trait of his race.
Okay, good to know.
But an interesting callback to sort of this really poetic, and I think you used the word, Ivy's, like this poetic thing about ontology, right? Is that you can do any number of things or not do them or try to, but like there is a really, I find comforting kind of poetic truth about ontology, right? Is that it, even when it's inconvenient, or is that it is inescapable and it's irreducible, right? And so that is sort of the like, you know, interspecies, inter everything that Star Trek does so well, is that ultimately it has a clear theology of ontology, that all life kind of has this essential essence to it that is universal. It is sort of, it can communicate to itself across all of these seemingly limitless chasms, right? And it keeps a clear eye on that, and is quick to sort of level people when they seem to think that they are the singular exception to their own ontology. And I think that's a function of humility, right? And that's what that's a kind of humility that we are called to cultivate.
And I do just love Spock, like, in the library, being like, let me just read all of this to see if anything happens. But I do think there is something also really important about that, of, like, taking the time to actually, like, read and understand what they had. And even though that wasn't able to sort of, like, save the day, it did give them a better understanding of, like, what was actually happening as well.
It helped them assuage their fear, right, of the other, right? They, in taking the time, and this is kind of to your point, Taylor, like in taking that time to understand them from their own perspective, right, from their own point of view, they were able to see that the behavior they did think, you know, well, of course, understandably, when you have like lightning people, you know, trying to bust through a door, like, that is concerning, right? But, you know, it was only in taking that time to, you know, exist from that perspective as best they could, that they were able to then know that these lightning people were actually there to help them. And I think that's a very instructive scene for us these days. I agree.
And it's interesting because the light could hurt them and protect them, because you didn't know who they were until, like, the end. So the light was what was killing everyone up on the ship, but the light was what was protecting everyone down on the ground.
So perception is a lot.
And also that there can be duality in things.
Yes.
It can be both.
Yep.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Does anybody have anything else?
Any last thoughts?
Any final thoughts?
Judge not, lest you be judged. You know.
Yeah, this was a tough one, because it's hard. It was hard for me to find a legitimate through line of theology, or from my layman's aspect of it. So it's just, you know, do unto others. You know, one of those things.
It's not a small one. So
yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, this was an episode of Tea Time Theology. Drake, if someone wants to get in touch with you or see you on a Sunday, where or how would they do that?
Well, you're going to make your way down to the campus, the beautiful campus of the University of Rhode Island, where St. Augustine's Church has been standing for several decades to serve as mission to the campus community and to a wonderful community of people who've been there for a long time. We have services on Sunday at 9:30. We also have campus ministry during the week. So give us a Google, St. Augustine's URI, and come check it out.
All right. Thanks, and we'll see you guys next week.
I'm going there to see my father. I'm going there no more to roam. I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going I'm only going over Jordan. I'm only going over home.
Thank you for listening to Tea Time Theology, a ministry of St. John's Cathedral in Rhode Island. We would like to thank our producers, Ivy Swinsky and Taylor Wilkie. Special thanks to Mariah Akande and David Hines for this season's music. Additionally, we would like to thank our sponsor, the Episcopal Diocese of Rhode Island, and the Right Reverend Nicholas Knisley, as well as our guests today. Follow us at Tea Time Theology on all social medias.